Welcome to the Living Medicine Podcast, where we talk about ethical medical use of psychedelic psychotherapy, teaching skills, examining the issues, and interviewing interesting people. Now let's start today's show.
Hello, everyone. You are at the Living Medicine Podcast, a podcast where I interview interesting people in the psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy space who are doing a variety of different things clinically, research, or moving the field forward. And I am Dr. Sandy Newis, and I'm one of the co-founders and owner of Living Medicine Institute, a business where we provide clinical training, resources, and content for clinical and medical professionals who are interested in deepening or launching their practice in ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, and the skills are applicable to other medicines as well. So we're doing something different today. I am excited that I have Chad Branson here, who's from Rise 25, which is the company that produces this podcast, and we're gonna switch it up, and he's actually going to interview me. So I am excited to have Chad here. My experience is you are a great interviewer, and I look forward to how this can go.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me today, Dr. Sandy. Let's kind of dive into a little bit more about ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. What
Great.
initially drew you to working with that as a therapeutic tool?
Good. Well, I honestly got into it because I was thinking it was going to be a stopgap to MDMA. So I was really interested in working with MDMA, and this was about 2019. And we were all looking forward to the approval from the FDA. And the people that I initially started working with were kind of in the queue to be doing research in that area. So I thought I was kind of moving into that area. And while I, quote, waited for that, I wanted to do a deep dive into ketamine. So they also ran a ketamine clinic, and I helped them kind of grow the piece where we brought therapists in, which is referred to as ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. Historically, ketamine, one, it was used in medical settings. And then two, they found profound impact on mental health issues. And so it began to be used kind of in a medicalized way at primarily IV clinics. And this clinic was also doing that. And they had a small practice where they were doing ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. But I came in, and then we, collectively began to grow that. So that clinic moved into doing ketamine alone and CAP. And the CAP is then what I've moved into teaching and training because I think it's really powerful. So I used it initially as a stopgap, but really came to appreciate its clinical utility. It's really easy to fit into a clinical practice because you can actually schedule 2-hour sessions. People don't need to get off their meds. They don't need to make significant changes in their lives in order to fit it in. And it's extremely effective for the types of clients that I work with, which is primarily depression and anxiety, but often underneath that would be developmental or relational trauma or complex PTSD. So I'm sold. I think it's amazing. And
Sure.
it definitely will always have a place, even if other medicines become legalized, because I think it serves a really important purpose in a lot of ways.
So in between the time where you thought, oh, this sounds like an interesting idea, to now, what is one thing maybe you learned, like, oh, I never even thought that this would be a situation?
Oh, interesting. I mean, really, honestly, it's just the clinical utility of it. Like, just like what I have learned is, well, a couple different things. That's a great question. Just the clinical utility of it. Like, as compared to like other medicines aren't legal in most states, but even if they were, it's like a whole entire day and you have to do a lot of kind of preparation in different ways. And kind of, it takes a harder toll on the body. And there's just a lot more that goes into it in terms of like a practice. Because I have a traditional practice where I see people on the hour. So it's easy to fit a 2-hour session in. It's a lot different to fit a 6-hour session in. So just recognizing, and people also find it very easy to fit into their lives because you can, work a full day or mostly a full day and then do a 3 o'clock session and you're good to go. So just the ease of fitting it into a clinical practice, which makes it more accessible for people and for the therapists and the medical people that I work with. But beyond that really is how much of a relational intervention it is. People always think about ketamine as being, it's like, oh, it's a, dissociative anesthetic, like as if people just go inward. And if you only do it that way, then that would be the way that it would be. Like if you didn't do preparation and you didn't do integration and the person was not invested in you being a part of their experience, then you came in and were like, hey, do you feel like talking? They wouldn't.
Mm.
But if you're already in it and you're like in the bubble with them, then that becomes a really important piece of the equation.
Hmm. So, given all that, how would you kind of describe maybe the unique therapeutic possibilities that ketamine opens up compared to the traditional talk therapy that people are aware
Right.
of?
Well, I mean, ketamine is a very, very powerful tool. And what's important is it's not just one and done. Like you don't do one session and your life is forever changed necessarily. I mean, that happens to some people, but that's not really how it's used. It's used as part of a psychotherapy intervention. So with preparation, I do 3 to 5 preparation sessions before every session, a medicine session, and integration. And I prefer to work in series. So a minimum of 3 up to 8 kind of consecutive weeks, or sometimes twice in a week. That's how I prefer to work it. And from that perspective, it's not just the ketamine, it's the overall CAP process. And so we go really deep, really fast, and it can really help clients access things that they've never been able to access before. Just today, I was working with somebody who was telling a story from their teen years that, was undeniably a lot of trauma, and kind of just moving through that and being able to tell the story and to experience what it was like to be witnessed and to just go through it and actually kind of access all of these things in what a way that we call the observer mind. So it's not that you're just dispassionately watching it, but you can observe yourself. You can see the process as it unfolds while also telling the story. So you don't get hijacked by the story, nor are you, completely disconnected and defended from the story. There's sort of this blending where you can see things differently. You can see yourself differently. You can see things in your history differently. And it isn't that you come up with necessarily new insights, but you might see yourself going through it differently. For
Hmm.
example, just today, it was about, oh, wow, I really went through a lot and I adapted as best I could to the circumstances that were in front of me. And, there were some significant things that were playing into it, like family history as well as substance use. And so this person really could see some of the choices that they had made or some of the situations that they found themselves in differently, and could see that they were just really just a child, even though they were a teenager. And out of that comes self compassion and the ability to kind of soften and really see yourself differently and the people that were involved. And often people also come up with a different understanding of their family dynamics, that often parents are, victims of multi-generational trauma as well, and might have been doing the best they could, or just, different types of things like that. So it helps people get through their defense structures, get through their protective mechanisms, their adaptive structures, help them see them more clearly, help them kind of help them see the narrative that they're holding, see some of
Hmm.
the core beliefs and explore them differently, see them differently, and then also process the feelings and in a way that doesn't just take over, but rather can be really healing. And it's also all of that is done in a relational context. So, in a very carefully well held and safe therapeutic container with someone that they trust. So,
From what I understand, you have kind of a heavily experiential background. How does that
mhm.
kind of inform what you do?
Yeah, so I did my PhD in wilderness adventure therapy within the context of experiential education. And so, from that perspective, like everything becomes grist for the therapeutic mill. So, from the way that you enter into any experience, the way you engage with the other people in the experience, like it's not all about the experience. Like ketamine assisted psychotherapy is not all about the ketamine. Right. It's about how we enter into it, what comes up for people as they enter into it, what happens when we're building that therapeutic relationship in preparation. And that is a very experiential lens. It's called parallel process in experiential ed. That's also found in the transference literature in psychotherapy, but it means something related, but it's different, which is really, as a therapist, we're watching how a person engages with the experience, not just the content. So every single thing that they're doing and everything that they're experiencing with me, with whatever kind of, feeling they have about jumping in, are they going to jump into the ketamine? Are they rushing in? Are they reticent? Are they hesitant? And we could make it just about that, like, oh, well, let's talk about how you're feeling about going into the medicine session. But I'm also really watching and observing and witnessing the way they're engaging with the overall process. It's also analogous to process-oriented psychotherapy, but it's not just the content, it's the process and it's the experience. And what can they learn about themselves the way that they go through the experience? And what can I also learn about them? And then how can I use my relationship and also craft the experience to be able to maximize the therapeutic outcome?
I would imagine when you integrate something like this into a practice like psychotherapy, there could be a lot of misconceptions that arise, especially among maybe clients or even clinicians. What are some common ones have you found?
Well, there's a lot about dosing. Like, there's a very strong belief in some elements of the clinical community as well as kind of out there in the world that your goal is, quote, ego dissolution. That's something that people read about a lot, and that we want to use ketamine to like dissolve your sense of self. Well, in many people, that's actually counterproductive. And it also like that's a dosing issue. So when you go into those high dose ranges where that happens, well, for some people that can be beneficial. Others are just high. Right? You're just
Hmm.
like really out there and you're not really tracking it. And while you might feel a dissolving of sense of self, that can both be terrifying, or you also might not remember it because really the further up the dose chain we get, the higher the doses, the more we get to it actually being an anesthetic. Like my 5-year-old son got ketamine when he broke his arm. So he was out for 30 minutes. Like it's incredibly safe and very effective for that because it has no respiratory symptoms. So you can actually knock somebody out long enough to perform a quick medical procedure. So we don't want that, right? Like that's not necessarily therapeutically useful, but it is an artifact in the field that, many people still believe that that's useful. And in some cases it is. And there are some people that really strongly believe in that. And I'd be happy to talk with them because I would like to learn more. That's not historically the way that I've done it. But clients come in with that idea that, the goal is to like take as much as I can because there's going to be benefit from that. And like I said, if that is deemed as being therapeutically useful, like if it's helpful to kind of get past whatever might be holding you back or whatever, rigidity you might be holding on to, then by all means, or that sense of oneself dissolving and kind of reemerging. There could be some real reasons for that, but that's not necessarily the goal.
Hmm.
And, another super important thing because people have more and more access to ketamine because you can get lower costs through like some telehealth platforms and things like that. It's, showing up more and more on the recreational scene that ketamine is really safe under medical conditions, but it's also can be very addictive. And so just keep putting that out there. We want people to know. Like it's a public service announcement. I go like,
Hmm.
Dr. Stan, dude, like, but it can be really addictive. So, please don't use the fact that we're using ketamine therapeutically, or you might have a powerful therapeutic experience with ketamine as an excuse to go find it and overuse it because it can be very addictive. Not for all. It doesn't like immediately capture people and
Hmm.
send them down that road, but frequent use can result in that. So, so those are the things. Also, just this idea that, we're just taking drugs in order to get better. And what people don't realize is again, it's not just the medicine experience. It's the medicine has a pharmacological effect. It's also a relational experience. So it's really about being in that container with your therapist, with me or whoever that you're working with, or the medical team that you're working with. It's also really important to recognize again that it's just one piece of an overall process. Like because a lot of the like plant medicines and longer acting psychedelics and the research and the publicity have made it sound like you go and you take a medicine and you go like deep within yourself and you have some sort of aha moment where you realize a whole bunch of stuff and then my life will be forever changed. And it's really just not
Hmm.
like that. Like that is one piece of the equation. But another thing that really shifts is just people's felt sense of being in their bodies, being in their world. Like it isn't about like, oh, I realized something new about myself or my relationships.
Hmm.
It can be, but it's also like it just seems to shift things internally and shift our kind of internal dynamics in such a way that more just ease emerges. So Yeah.
So kind of along those same lines. Let's say I was a client, I was a prospective client of yours, but I had never undergone this type of therapy. I've never sought this type of therapy. Now I'm thinking about coming to see you. I think one of my first questions might be like, what does the going under the influence of ketamine have to do with my daily life?
Oh, right. Yeah. Well, like, at that point, yes and yes and. So that's really where the experiential lens really comes in,
Hmm.
is kind of looking at the way that you engage with the experience. So I am tracking very closely not only what comes up. So one, I'm taking notes, and then we'll have an integration session within 48 hours. 24 to 48 hours usually we'll meet again, and I'll go over the notes, and we'll go over your experience. And the goal with that is the kind of, in the experiential world, it's like, you know, the what, so what and now what. So we're making, this is like the now what piece. So I am writing down everything that the client says. I'm tracking that within the context of their history and what their treatment goals are. And I'm guiding and I'm noticing and I'm sitting with them and I'm reflecting and I'm deepening that experience to kind of help guide them towards things that seem relevant to their goals. And then what is happening in integration is we're going over the content. So that's the what that actually came up. We are kind of looking at how that becomes relevant to their daily life and what there is to learn about that. But also the coming into the experience. Here's the experiential lens, the way that somebody settles into the experience, the way that they engage with the medicine, their ability to connect more deeply or not with themselves, with me, with the overall environment. And then what does that show them about the way they engage with life? So that's another really great example of the
Hmm.
experiential. So it's not just the what, it's the overall process of it.
Let's talk a little bit about how ketamine can help with treatment of trauma and anxiety.
Mhm.
How does ketamine impact the nervous system differently for clients dealing with trauma compared with clients dealing primarily with anxiety?
Well, it's really more depression.
Okay.
So, let's kind of, as ketamine makes its way more and more into the mainstream, there is an interesting phenomena happening where ketamine clinics run by medical providers make very broad claims of treating mental health issues. And some of them, if you look at them, it's a very long list. And what is true is that ketamine can be powerful pharmacologically for a wide range of different types of disorders, different types of symptoms, different types of things. But really, the more clinically complex the issues, the more I would recommend somebody work with a therapist. And clinically complex means I'm experiencing a lot of different things. I might meet criteria for a lot of different diagnoses. It might also mean that this has been with me since childhood, and this can be traced to developmental history, family relationships, other types of relationships, and they're continuing to play itself out in my day to day, in my relational context, in my work context, in my family context. So that's really, it's not just severity of symptoms, but it's kind of the way in which these things show up all over one's life. So, yeah, so kind of keeping in mind that's what I mean by that.
Mm.
But these clinics make these really broad sweeping claims like I treat OCD and depression and anxiety and generalized anxiety and eating disorders and trauma and PTSD and that's all without a therapist. So I think it's really important that people who are interested in finding this treatment really recognize that, as well as professionals who are interested in referring to it or getting trained in it, is that just know like sometimes these claims are made that you might be like, don't you need psychotherapy to work with that? And the answer would be yes. So there are many medical clinics that, there's some that require a person to have a therapist or at least a referring, therapeutic professional, which might be a psychiatrist. And so, that's another model that people work with that. So, but my perspective is that depression is really the thing that is the most amenable to ketamine. And here's what I mean by depression. So we all think that we know what that is. And, but depression means a lot of different things. There's the type of depression where you experience a lot of hopelessness. You might experience a lot of angst. You might feel like life isn't worth living. There might be some suicidal thoughts. We refer to that as suicidal ideation. It can be very effective for that. And then there's also kind of what I call shades of gray, just like dysphoric mood, where everything's just heavy and gray. Like in my house, we have a gray weighted blanket, and
Hmm.
it's kind of like that. But ketamine can be extraordinarily effective for that type of depression. However, in some instances, and that can be without a therapist, in some instances, the depression itself is serving kind of a like a protective blanket. It's almost like weighting the person down. We call that tamping down the symptoms.
Mm.
So kind of like it's like the heaviness of the depression is covering up the underlying anxiety or is has become an adaptive mechanism to um, kind of tamp down the trauma response. And the trauma response is anxiety, but if you really dig into it, it's actually hypervigilance, which is our survival brain, our central nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system, which gets us ready to fight, fight tigers, run from tigers, freeze in the face of tigers, or befriend the tiger, is constantly scanning the world for threat. And so that keeps us in that state of activation. And it involves the body, it involves the entire nervous system, and it is exceptionally difficult to think one's way out of that because our survival brain is essentially at the top of the chain in terms of survival necessity, obviously. So it's really difficult to just like drop into a felt sense of well being when every part of your nervous system is screaming out that your world's not safe. So in some cases, I suspect that the people who do not have positive outcomes at a ketamine clinic alone and then do when working with therapists, which is many of my clients,
Hmm.
it's because now we're working with the underlying nervous system based response and not just working with the symptoms. And in order to do that, either working with a therapist or, there are people who have a great deal of self-awareness. Maybe they've been to therapy before, they understand their own personal dynamics, and they might have the capacity to carry that with them or to guide the session in such a way. But most don't, to be frank. So really differentiating those pieces, I think, is really important. And I think that's a big piece of where the field is going to evolve into as it gets more and more clinically sophisticated.
What does trauma informed care look like in a ketamine assisted psychotherapy session?
Well, I mean, the biggest thing with trauma informed care really ties into, in the psychedelic world, which we refer to as set and setting. So, set and setting is what is the mindset that the person walks in with? And that is not just like, oh, think happy thoughts and then walk in and like, just convince yourself that you're going to have a good time. It's do you feel safe?
Mm.
So the core element of trauma informed care is safety. Does the person feel safe? Does the setting, and this is setting now. So set and setting is the person's mindset and what they come in with, the attitudes that they come in with, which has to do also with the relationships that they have with the team, as well as setting. So this is rather, kind of an emerging area for those of us who've been in it for a while. It doesn't feel emerging, but there are many clinics that really don't attend to this well. And so the setting should be quiet. It should be calm. It should be private. It should be conducive to really dropping in and letting go. So the chairs should be comfortable. There should
Mm.
be music. Music is a really important part of the equation. Sorry, I just bumped the table here. Music is an important part of the equation. There should be a good speaker, not just like
Mm.
a bad speaker. We don't want people to be playing things through their own phones. So there are little things that are big things because we want to minimize interruptions. So it should be calm. It should be outside noise should be minimized as much as is possible. So like don't be talking in the hall outside of it. Because people, when they're under the influence of ketamine, they have a high level of sensory awareness and they're so dropped in. Like they're literally sitting there with eye shades and sometimes headphones if there's not a therapist, always a speaker. And the goal is to really go inward and reflect. And if you're working with a therapist, to kind of process through things that are coming up. And you just don't want things to be pulling you out of that. Now, an experiential lens would be like, that's interesting. Let's just notice what comes up around the fact that you can, you smell somebody cooking Indian food. Like that actually happened to me the other day.
Mm.
I was like,
Hmm.
oh, look at that. To some people, it's a non thing. Other people might become irrationally mad. Other people, it might take them back to their, grandmother's cooking. Like it takes you somewhere else. And
Mm.
sometimes that can be good, but often it's just distracting. So, and then also a very strong element of agency or choice that a person knows that they can stop. Like people that are, that I've worked with that are very anxious or that we're
Hmm.
working with PTSD and trauma, they need to know they can turn it off. Like that's one of the big advantages of IV ketamine or
Hmm.
intranasal when you're working in a therapist office because you can stop. With intramuscular and with lozenges, you can't. Once you're in it. But you can turn it off. You can turn off the drip and somebody will be, roughly sober in 20-ish minutes.
Hmm.
And within 5 to 10 minutes, they'll start feeling it, like that it's diminishing. So people knowing that they can turn it off, that they can slow it down, that they don't have to do it just because they showed up at the office. They don't have to do it. Like I think clinics should give people the option to not pay if they come in the first time and they just decide they can't do it so that they
Mm.
don't forced, maybe just one, not always, but just the first one.
Hmm.
Um, and so choice, feeling safe, both in the setting and also in the relationship. So the staff, every single person that's interacting with the client is a part of the team that's helping them feel safe. And that they are kind of being given permission and the support that they need to go more deeply into this place. Like when working with trauma, if you don't have a therapist or a medical team that knows how to work with that, like stuff does come up. It doesn't always come up, but it does come up. And so the client needs to know that the team that they're working with has the capacity to hold that and not just like tamp it down and just comfort them, but rather to help them work through that and to process that. Because I've had a lot of clients through the years that have come in and just been like, oh, wow, like this came up for me and I just didn't have the place to integrate it. I didn't have any place to go with that. And it was actually harmful. But they don't always know that that could happen. So if you are just a ketamine clinic that's really just doing kind of a higher volume practice and you don't have the staff to really attend to that as much, you might not tell a client that that could happen. And if it does happen for them, then that can be really, really damaging.
Hmm.
Like, so people can actually get traumatized from psychedelic experiences. They don't always. I mean, I
Hmm.
think it speaks to the power of the medicine and the safety of the medicine that we don't always hear about that, right? Like it's
Hmm.
like people can get ketamine from a telehealth platform where they get it mailed to themselves. They do it at their own home, sometimes with the coach, sometimes not, sometimes support, sometimes not. And we hear of some adverse reactions, like there's actually a wrongful death suit kind of working through the courts right now. Um, but we also don't like I mean, you don't hear about it as much as you might think. So it speaks to the safety of that. But that is super not trauma informed. Like just like,
Sure.
okay, here
Sure.
you go. We're gonna like send you this medicine and it's really powerful and it treats a whole bunch of stuff and you're gonna be awesome and just make sure you have somebody in the house and we'll check in on you in a couple of days. Um, because if you don't know what to expect and you go really deeply into some difficult things and you don't have a place to land with that, both during the session and after an integration, it can be really overwhelming. So, really attending to all of those different pieces, giving the client choice, making sure they feel safe, making sure they are supported, and that the set and setting is super conducive to them feeling safe and not having jarring things come in unexpectedly. Because if you think about it, if you walk into a clinic, you, Chad, walk into a clinic and you're like, I want to do this. And, we're like, oh, okay, great. We're going to like hook you up with an IV or we're going to give you intramuscular or, come into my office and we're going to do, maybe do it in my office and other different ways. And you don't really know what to expect. You're not fully prepared. It's going to be terrifying, right?
Yeah.
Like it's like like okay, now put these eye shades on and now we're gonna listen to some music and now we're just gonna lay here and you're gonna get really, really altered and I promise you it'll be good. Like, no. So, people need to be kind of walked through that. And then
Hmm.
at deeper level, like, working with trauma involves really having a therapist who is trained in trauma processing tools. And there can be a lot of those different things. I work in a heavily somatic way. So, really working with the body, knowing how to bring the body in. Like, you cannot regulate the nervous system and recalibrate the nervous system, which is what recovery from trauma essentially is, without working with the nervous system. And you
Hmm.
work with the nervous system by working with the body. So, because our thinking and our thought processes essentially go offline and become very hypervigilant and threat focused. So, we can't just think that we should feel better. We can't just think and shift our perspective when our nervous system is screaming out that there's danger
Mm.
around. And that comes when we have a lifetime history that leads us to places where things have been really dangerous or overwhelming. So,
Have you observed any patterns, either somatic or emotional, that tend to emerge for trauma clients during ketamine sessions?
yeah, there, yes, and I mean, there's kind of, a variety of different areas. So, one, I think, again, cannot emphasize the importance of doing a really thorough preparation where you really get a full developmental history, which includes a trauma history. What does somebody consider to be traumatic events or experiences or time periods in their life? Um, and also really important to understand that, the way I use trauma is really broad. Like they might use trauma differently in like the VA, like war trauma or first responder trauma or event trauma.
Hmm.
Relational traumas, and a lot of times those things go together, but a more complex PTSD is really, a lot of really difficult, overwhelming. It can be rejection, it can be getting teased, it can be picked on or bullied or abused or neglected. And the more we experience that in early childhood, the more likely that is going to be to show up in our later life. And so we're looking to interrupt those patterns, and it's really difficult to think your way through that, but people try. So, for example, I'm working with somebody right now, um, and this person came in with a very well developed story about their life. They had been in a lot of therapy. They've been worked with some really good people, and so when they go to story, they start kind of storylining, like, well, this is what was going on in my marriage, or this is what was going on in my family when I was growing up, and recognizing that that is a disconnect for them from their body and from their feelings. So really watching, when somebody gets really in their head, when somebody is really disconnected from their body, then we want to bring them into their body. There can also be a like ruminative thought pattern. So they might be looping on particular events in their life, or there may be other things that kind of emerge, but you can sense that it keeps looping. They keep getting kind of stuck in it,
Hmm.
and it loops through. And so, really watching for that. And then that actually requires a different approach with the dosing of the medicine.
Mm.
Um, then there's a lot of like interpersonal kind of relational things, and that's watching how they engage with me. So, it's very common for people to, it's a real intense relationship and it can go fast and suddenly people get nervous. And when they get nervous, that they might show up like they might get critical or they might get they might feel like pulling back or they might want to disengage. And you kind of feel that and you can track that. So we're paying attention to, and we refer to that as attachment work. So we're paying attention to what's coming up for somebody in a relational way. And
Hmm.
so I'm tracking all of those different things and I'm helping somebody, we're kind of working with this comes out of Hakomi, which is a, trauma focused somatic sort of methodology. And it's we have the body, we have the thoughts, we have the emotion, and then I would add in the relationship. So we're working with these four broad areas and trying to kind of intervene. Are we intervening on the thought belief level? Are we intervening on the body level? Are we trying to like work with sensation? Are we intervening on the relational level? And do they need additional reassurance that they're safe or that I'm with them? Or is it in the emotional level? Do we need to go more deeply into the emotion and kind of tracking all of those different things as they're emerging? And then really watching for body memory that's coming in or areas of holding. We call that body armoring. So somebody might be going into some really difficult things and they might kind of armor up and you can see it and you can feel it. So
Hmm.
then, maybe helping somebody connect and maybe helping them find an area in their body that feels a sense of well-being or neutrality and really working with that and kind of unraveling and, kind of working with feeling safe with just feeling okay. Another thing that I'm tracking really carefully is somebody's ability to sit with sensations of neutrality or well-being, which we call growing the good? Can they sit with sensations that emerge that feel okay? Or do they automatically go away from that?
Mm.
Because a big piece of recovery from trauma is learning that it's okay to feel okay. I got that from a friend of mine, Katie Asmus, who's a trauma
Hmm.
therapist extraordinaire and teacher and trainer herself. And, people just don't feel okay feeling okay when things are okay a lot of times because the hypervigilant brain part, their central nervous system just won't let them.
Hmm.
And so that's what we're really going for is for people just reaching a point where they can feel okay when things are okay. Which sounds like an alliteration and is. There's like a hypnotic language piece to that, but it is also really like that's essentially what change is.
Sure, sure. Is it possible for ketamine maybe to uncover sometimes traumatic material that a client wasn't aware of? And if so, how do
Yeah.
you kind of guide them through that safely?
Yeah, I haven't had a ton of things come up that somebody just never was aware of.
Hmm.
Like kind of repressed memory type things. A little bit of that, and it can happen and could happen. It happens less than clients think it's going to. Like clients are often really afraid of that. Um, Instead, what can happen is a more whole story. So, like somebody might be aware of the fact that there was, sexual trauma in their past, but then as they kind of dive into it, like maybe more comes up, or maybe more of a story begins to emerge. Um, and with that, we just work with that the same as anything else. So we work with that. We help a client resource themselves. We help them tell their story. Like I'm going to kind of, push is really the wrong word because that's not what we're doing with the medicine, but I'm going to be guiding somebody to tell their story more under the influence of ketamine than I might in a traditional therapy session where I might be titrating back and forth with the story or helping person kind of resource themselves, which is find a place that feels okay while they're telling the story and go back and forth to kind of interrupt the download. But with ketamine, I might just gently stay with it and remind them that I'm with them and just look for that. And then I might also be looking for a way to kind of restory it. Like, were they resourceful? Were they strong? Did they adapt to a difficult situation? Kind of emphasizing that, you were really working really hard to survive and to get back through that. Because what we want, one of the outcomes that can happen that is nice when it does, is to be a person be able to see themselves differently.
Hmm.
Like I was doing the best that I could with the resources that I had at any given moment. Yeah.
I think this question is a good one to wrap things up on. This has been very interesting and informative. Last question for you: what makes good trauma treatment, and how is it different?
I mean, I think really from minute one, like really focusing on the core tenets of trauma informed care, which I already went through,
Hmm.
feeling safe in relationship, feeling safe in the setting, feeling understood, feeling like somebody gets you, and really working in a relationally way, recognizing that most trauma took place in the context of relationships. So we're using relationship to heal. Having some kind of trauma reprocessing tools that can be, you know, it can be EMDR, it can be, I work with the Trauma Resource Institute and the trauma resilience model. There can be somatic experiencing, it can be sensory motor, it can be havening. There's a lot of different ways, but having some real trauma reprocessing tools available to you and be able to use them, not just in the medicine session, but afterwards, I think is of critical importance. Like not just that you understand how trauma works, but and I interviewed Karen Sprinkle on this a few weeks ago, and she talked about that. Just really, don't claim you're a trauma expert if you're not a trauma expert. Like, and if you want to become an expert, then do so. But to really have that and to also really understand that trauma is not just about the event or the events. It's about the way that it manifests in the body and the way that it shows up in relationship to self, world, and others, that it's much broader. And so, kind of recognizing that when you're working with somebody who has a nervous system that has been adversely impacted by chronic stress or trauma, that's going to show up in a lot of different ways. So, it's not just about reprocessing the event. It's not about that, but that it's a much broader way and that it also takes a while. So, that's very specifically like where we're not doing the one and done thing, like that we need to understand because I work a lot with the concept I work with is very simple. Like I play this game, I'll be like, let's see how simple we can make something.
Mhm.
But, contraction, like we contract when our nervous system is in a state of fear and hypervigilance. And then if we can use the medicine and the interventions to reach a place of expansion, then we want to help somebody learn to feel safe at maintaining that, recognizing that they're going to go back into contraction because that's what life will do. And so a lot of the way that I work is helping people develop a difference in the felt sense of what it's like to be in this versus when they're in that more open state. So helping them really recognize and work with that.
Okay. Hey, Dr. Sandy, it's been great to talk to you today. Thanks so much. This has been very interesting and informative. Really appreciate your time and all of your insights.
Great. Well, thank you, Chad. I really appreciated it. And it was lovely to be with you again. And thank you so much.
Absolutely. So long, everybody.
Thanks for listening to Living Medicine. We'll see you again next time. Be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.